State management technique. As a part of this particular module, I am going to cover cookies and sessions. Two very important state management techniques. But before that, let us briefly understand what is the purpose of state management. HTTP protocol is a stateless protocol. Now what does it mean? See, whenever a request is sent from browser to server, along with the request, which is in the form of URL, there will be some additional data submitted. Now that data can be in the form of query string. That data can be in the form of some form input elements. And this query string and form data in our web server is going to become available to an ASP.NET application in the form of route data, which is again going to be passed as parameter to the action method. In action method, we will use that data, do some processing, return the result to view. View is going to generate HTML output and that gets rendered to the browser, and server breaks the connection with the browser. In other words, once the response is rendered, server is going to forget everything about the client. All the objects which are created on behalf of the client, all the data encapsulated in that object immediately becomes ready for garbage collection. Nothing remains. So there is no information or data retained on server for any particular client once the response is rendered, and this is the basic characteristics of a HTTP protocol. And that is the reason we say that HTTP protocol is stateless. State is not maintained on server. Now why HTTP protocol is made as stateless? So that even with the increasing number of clients, the load on the server should not increase. Imagine if there are 1 lakh clients submitting the request to server, and some data about each of these clients has to be retained on server. It is going to be tough time. So much amount of memory would not be available unless that data is saved in database, which is a completely different story. But otherwise the information about the client cannot be saved on server in memory, and hence HTTP protocol specification says that it is stateless, which is good here. But then at the same time, there are a lot of practical situations where we want web server not to ask us for the same information again and again. Let me ideally take an example of gmail.com. Whenever I want to view my emails, I am going to provide my username and password and login. Now once I log in, Gmail server is going to authenticate me. That means check my username and password is valid or not. And once validated, it would like to return the list of all emails to me, and it does so. Now when I click on the first mail which I want to view, does Gmail again asks me for username and password? No. Then how does Gmail know that the user has already logged in? Yes, that is where cookies and sessions are going to be useful. So cookies is what? Cookie is used for sharing data across requests by the same client or user, and the data is stored on the client or browser machine. The very first point about cookies. So cookies is a collection of name value pairs actually. So one cookie we can say is one pair. Every cookie has a name and a value. So one cookie is one pair, and this cookie, when processing the request, will get created on server. Once it is created on server, we are going to add it to the response. Browser is then going to pick up that cookie from the response and will save it on the client machine. That is, in memory of the client machine, that cookie is saved. Now once the cookie is saved in memory of the client machine, the advantage is with every subsequent request the browser submits to the web server, it automatically includes all the cookies in the request, and server will then have the advantage of picking up those cookies, or at least the cookie which it is interested in that request, and get the data back. So let me explain once again. From browser, the request is sent to server. Now server is doing what? Server generates cookie. Server generates cookie and writes them back to browser. So what is happening now? Browser receives it and stores it locally on the client machine. Now what will happen? Browser will again submit the request. Browser will again submit the request to server. Now in this request, whatever cookies browser has received, automatically all those cookies are included. So server now will have the advantage of whatever data it has sent to the client, it can make use of all that data again here. That is the basic advantage. It is something like, I go to a reservation counter, I pay him some money, I take a ticket, and then I use that ticket to travel in my train. So the ticket checker is only responsible for checking for the ticket. He doesn't want the money. So what is the guarantee that I have paid money? The ticket. Exactly like that, cookie is a ticket. Or you take the example of shopping cart. Nowadays we buy so many things online. We go to one product, we mention the quantity and add to cart. We go to another product, we mention quantity and add to cart. Like that we select so many products and we say add to cart. But what is add to cart? Technically speaking, add to cart is nothing but a collection of cookies and their values. Server is not remembering my cart. They are all stored on my local machine in browser. So obviously, after adding to cart, if I clear my browser cache and cookies locally, automatically my cart will get empty. You can experiment that. You can go to eBay or Amazon or Flipkart or so many online e-commerce websites, add some items to the cart, go to the browser, clear your browser cache along with the cookies, and then you will see that your cart is empty. So where is the cart information stored? Yes, it is on local client machine from where I was adding items to the cart and not on server. So now the most important thing is, how are cookies traveling between client and server? See, we know that as per HTTP protocol, always there is something called as request structure and response structure. Request structure we know is browser to server, and response structure we know is from server to browser. Now this request structure is supposed to have request headers, and one of the request header here is cookie, and this cookie is supposed to contain the name of the cookie is equal to the value of the cookie. Let's say value of the cookie, and then we will have ampersand, name of the cookie is equal to value of the cookie, ampersand, name of the cookie is equal to value of the cookie. Like this request header is going to contain all the name and value pairs of the cookie. But what is the condition to include all this? Let us see that. But before that, we have got response structure. Response structure is in which format the response goes from server to browser. In response structure, we have got response headers. Now one of the response header is set cookie. This is actually the cookie which is going to be submitted from server to browser. Now what is that a server will provide for browser about the cookie? Yes, it will provide cookie name with its value, but in addition to that, the server also includes the domain name, whatever that domain name is. Let us say something like x.com, and then it will have path, which is nothing but the path slash some demo. Then it will have expires, some date on which it is supposed to expire. Say 1st January 2016 blah 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 time. Semicolon secure is equal to either true or false. So set cookie is a response header, is the name of the response header, and for each cookie server will send all these things to the browser. Name of the cookie, value of the cookie, domain, path, expires and secure. But at the same time you should remember, browser will receive all this and will save it locally. That's what I said. Server generates cookie and writes them to the browser. Server generates all this and writes to the browser. Browser receives it and stores it locally. But when the browser is submitting, it is only submitting name and value. It is not submitting rest of the values. It is not submitting domain, path, expires and secure. It is only including name and value in the request. But what about these things? What is the significance of these things when they are not included back in the request? Pretty simple. It is based on these domain, path, expires and secure attributes of a cookie. Browser is actually going to decide whether to include the cookie in the request or not. See, while browsing, I might get cookie from Amazon.com, I might get cookie from eBay.com, I might probably get cookie from Flipkart.com. So many other websites also I can get different cookies. So should my browser send cookies of Amazon to eBay or eBay to Flipkart? Obviously not. So server is going to include domain name and write that to the browser so that browser will include this cookie only if the request is sent to this domain. Implies what? Now suppose when I am submitting a request from browser to server, we are supposed to provide the URL. So let us say the URL is something like this: www.zyx.com and /demo/test. Let us say this is the URL where I am thinking demo controller, action method is test. Imagine. So now what browser is going to do is, it is going to check only cookies with the domain zyx.com. So is this there? Yes. So first parameter qualified. Second thing it is going to check is the path mentioned, that is this, is there or not? Yes, it is there. So second parameter also qualified. Third is going to check is the cookie expired? No, not yet expired. So fourth also qualified. Fifth it is going to check is secure. Now here I have given secure false, but imagine if secure is true. Browser will include this cookie in the request only if the protocol is HTTP yes, this yes. If secure is true, browser includes only if the HTTP yes is used. Otherwise browser will not include. Because I have given here false, irrespective of whether it is HTTP or HTTPS, in either case cookie qualifies. So yes, I repeat once again, it is on the basis of domain, path, expires and secure. As in the URL, browser is going to decide whether to include this pair in the request or exclude it. But remember, many times I might give something like www.zyx.com. In such case, domain should be as it is here. But if suppose nothing is given, www.zyx.com is not given. In such case, what will happen? Here, even if I have www or test or ABC, anything, whatever may be here, subdomains basically, any subdomain of this zyx.com, the cookie will be included. For others, it will not be included. Let us quickly once again summarize everything. Cookies are used for sharing data across requests by same user, client, and data is stored on the client or browser machine. Perfect. With every request, browser automatically includes all the cookies appropriate to that request, which is very important, appropriate to that request. The cookie name value pairs are submitted in the form of a request header called as cookie. Request header name is cookie. But we have learned in the introduction chapter that all the request headers on server are saved in the form of CGI environmental variables. So the name of CGI environmental variable for cookie is HTTP_cookie. Server variable is cookie. but the CGI environmental variable is HTTP underscore cookie. Remember, CGI environmental variables in ASP.NET are also referred as server variables. Then, cookie generated on server, that is added to the response, are rendered to the browser using a response header called as set cookie. Basically, in a response header called as set cookie. Every response cookie has name, value, domain, path, expires, and secure attributes. These attributes are used by the browser for deciding whether to include the cookie in the request or not. And obviously, this is purely based on the URL of the request. Remember, very important point, domain, path, expired, secure are not included with the cookie in the request. They only come from server to client. Client to server, they are never included. So this is the behavior of cookies specification. Also, let me clarify, cookie is not a specification in HTTP protocol. Cookie is a specification added on top of HTTP protocol by Netscape. Netscape, which is an organization providing Netscape Navigator. On old days, it was very popular browser, Netscape Navigator. Much before Internet Explorer existed, Netscape Navigator was the browser. So Netscape is the organization name, and they are the one who have introduced the concept of cookies. And it is not integral part of HTTP protocol. Let us now understand another very important aspect of cookies, that is types of cookies. There are two types of cookies. One is called as persistent cookie and the other is non-persistent cookie. Now, what is the difference between persistent and non-persistent cookies? Cookies which are permanently stored on the client machine in the form of a file. Those type of cookies are referred as persistent cookies. In a file, the data will be stored. Cookies which are only stored in memory, RAM, temporary memory of the browser, which is running on the client machine. In the memory of the browser instance, we call it. So those type of cookies which are temporarily stored in the browser's memory are referred as non-persistent cookies. Now, what is the basic difference between persistent and non-persistent cookies? Let us say, for example, from Internet Explorer, I submit the request for some page and I get the response. In the response, we are going to receive C1 with the value V1 and C2 with the value V2. Let us assume so. And we are also assuming that C1 and V1 is a persistent cookie. So it will be stored in a file here. Whereas C2 and V2, basically the cookie C2 is a non-persistent memory cookie. So it will be stored in the memory of your browser. Now on the same machine, I am going to start another instance. And in that instance, again I submit a request for page 1. So that time when I get for C1, the value as V1 and for C2, value as V2. Actually, this should be V21, C1, V21, C2, V22. Imagine. So in such case, the Internet Explorer in memory will store C2 is equal to V22. But after this second request, in the same file, the value of C1 will be overwritten and that will become C11. What basically I am trying to say here is, persistent cookies are shared across multiple browser instances. This is one instance of IE running and this is another instance of IE running, and both are going to share a single copy of the persistent cookie. So after 1, C1 will be V1, but after 2, C2 will be V11. This is supposed to be V11. It's a printing mistake. But after 2 also, the value of C2 submitted by this IE is always going to be V22 and the value of this instance is always going to be V2. That is different. So yes, the major difference between a non-persistent and a persistent cookie is persistent cookies will be shared between all the browser instances of a particular type. This is also important. IE and IE will share persistent, but Firefox will not have the same temporary file system. Firefox will have its own temporary file system, so it will store its cookie in a different location. So persistent cookies are also not shared between different browser types, but for a particular browser type, all the persistent cookies are shared from a given machine, and non-persistent will be different because they are in memory. Take the simple example of Gmail. If I start Internet Explorer and if I log on to Gmail from one instance, and then if I start another instance of Internet Explorer, I am going to remain logged in. It will not again ask me for the username and password once again from the new instance. So pretty obviously it clearly means that the cookie created by Gmail when we log in successfully is a persistent cookie. But at the same time we should also know if from Internet Explorer we are logged in, but when we go to Gmail using Chrome or Firefox, it will not show us as login. It will again ask us to log in separately. Why? As I said earlier, the cookie created by Gmail is a persistent cookie, and the persistent cookie of IE cannot be used by Internet Explorer or Chrome. Every browser type will have its own persistent cookie. They are not shared. Let us now quickly revise everything. 1. Cookies are submitted by browser to server in the form of request header cookie and server variable name http_cookie. Request only contains name and value pairs separated by ampersand. Server is going to add to the response name, value, domain, path, expires and secure. All this is submitted in the form of a response header set cookie, and this will get saved on the client machine, which can be either a persistent cookie or a non-persistent cookie. Persistent cookies are permanently saved on the client machine in the form of file, and thus they will be shared across all the browser instances of a particular type. Even if you shut down the machine and restart, the persistent cookie will remain. Whereas non-persistent cookie is only temporarily stored in browser's memory, and once you close the browser, obviously that cookie gets destroyed, and hence they are also referred as session cookies. Very important thing, even between the same type of browser, multiple instances, non-persistent cookies cannot be shared. So this is what is common. Let me clarify one very important thing. Whatever I have discussed in the video so far has nothing to do with ASP or JSP or PHP or MVC or anything. It's all as per what is documented about cookies in the specification. Thank you.